Graffiti, at its very core, is an inherently social activity. And the relationships between writers and the general public, as well as the relationship between writers and each other, underline graffiti as a whole. And as a writer in the late 90s, I found the relationships, especially between writers and each other, to be incredibly close. But in 2025, is that currently the case? But before I answer this question, let's take a look back and see what those relationships were like back during my time in the 90s. Simply put, as a graffiti writer in the 90s, the only thing I ever consistently did by myself was practice. And ultimately, pretty much anything I did as a graffiti writer in the 90s was either through other people or with them. And this includes getting involved in graffiti itself. Up until I was in 5th grade, I went to an elementary school called Junipero Serra, which is right across the street from both Holly Park and the Holly Courts projects. And when I was a 2nd grader at this school, I met a Cambodian kid that was a little bit older than me. This kid lived in those Holly Courts projects that I just mentioned, and a lot of kids that I came to be cool with at that school lived there as well. Me and this kid especially used to play a lot of handball together, but after he graduated and I transferred away from the school, I lost contact with him and with a lot of people I was cool with in the courts. But I reconnected with a lot of these same people when I transferred to Everett in 1995. Also at Everett, I came to meet the homeboy E, who would become my graffiti mentor a year later. And I met him because he was kicking it with all these dudes that I already knew since the time I was like 6 or 7. And as soon as I reconnected with everybody, we all started riding the train together. We'd meet up at Randall and San Jose or 30th and Dolores and jump on that J and go to Everett together. But even though we weren't tagging yet, we were involved in vandalism, and during this time, we'd make a regular habit of punching one of the windows on the J train when we got off it. And either during or after the summer of 1996, I started hearing that that Cambodian kid that I used to play handball with was now involved in tagging. And eventually, I came to learn that he wrote Dalk. And this relationship that many of us had to Dalk highlights one of the stronger social aspects of graff during that time. And when Dalk started writing, he inspired a lot of us, myself included, to start writing too. And that's because a lot of us looked up to him. Many of us had known him for a really long time, and we considered him to be a really cool older dude, and whatever he was doing, we wanted to be down with it. And while this wasn't the case for me, many of these people that were inspired by him or started writing around the same time as Dalk became the original members of the crew HTS. And just like when we weren't tagging, we'd meet up now every single day, get together in person, usually in the same spot, and then we'd figure out where we're gonna go and what we're gonna hit that day. And down on Cortland and Mission, I could see a lot of people I knew. In addition to Dalk being down there, I could run into the homeboy E, I could run into the homeboy DI, I could run into the homeboy Kamai, and I could run into the homeboy Prayer too, although I didn't know him as well as some of these other people I'm mentioning. And especially with the homeboy E, I encountered a lot of situations, we went through a lot of things together, but it was always us together going through these things in real life. And during our travels out and about in the city, especially in the Mission District, we get to see a lot of people just floating around doing their own thing, especially those dudes from FMT and FN. And when we see some of these people, we pass information around, we pass gossip around, we just talk about the writers that we saw up, who was doing what where, who was locked up, who was in trouble, and who was really doing their thing. And sometimes, depending on who you ran into, they might put you onto something. They might put you onto spots. They might put you onto drivers that you need to watch out for, or drivers that you can hit up on their bus and they didn't give a damn, and they give you recommendations about what markers and what cans to use. But doing all these things together, especially tagging together, meant that you got criticism and critique right there on the spot. Sometimes as you were hitting up, sometimes you weren't even finished hitting up, and somebody was already telling you that your tag was whack. But during this time period where I was around a lot of these dudes, we also got into stuff together that wasn't graff related. And I remember with many of these same dudes that were the early guys from HTS, we planned a water fight where we got a bunch of super soakers, we got a bunch of water balloons, and we just flung them at each other and shot each other at Holly Park. And it's one of my best memories from that time period. After graduating from Everett, I started going to Wallenberg, and it was at Wallenberg where I met the homeboy K and got even deeper into the social aspects of graff. And it was a pretty similar setup to the year before, where we'd all be on the bus at the same time, not necessarily getting on at the same stop, but usually in the mornings going to Wallenberg, it was me, the homeboy K, the homeboy W, and a lot of times the homeboy Sins too. And when I wasn't kicking it with the homeboy K, this fool would just be out there in the city on his bike or on foot or on a bus, just exploring exploring and running into random people and making connections. And I got to meet a lot of people and be in a lot of places I never expected to be in because of the homeboy K. This is how I ended up meeting Payne from RC and how I started tagging out in Noe Valley in the avenues, and these things wouldn't have happened without this connection to this dude I met in high school. And ultimately, in a pre-internet time in the 90s, these kind of connections allowed you to see more, do more, and learn more. And the appearance of the internet didn't do much to change this. And in 97, 98 on the internet, you were still qualified by who you knew, what you did, and where you were from. And through this AOL chat room that I spent a gang of time in, I started getting to know some of the folks in San Francisco that were hitting pieces. And talking to these people just gave me more perspective and more insight and more inspiration. And by the time I stepped away from graffiti in late 1998, things were pretty much still the way they were when I started in 96. But halfway through this year of 2025, how did these social aspects of graff now compare to back in the day? Around the time that I started posting videos about graff, I got asked a very heartbreaking question. And this heartbreaking question was, "Hey Connor, how do I join a graff crew?" And it's heartbreaking because in San Francisco in the 90s, one of the easiest things you could do was joining a graff crew, but in 2025, it seems to be one of the hardest. And the reality of it is, in current times, many graff riders out there are flying solo. And some people can maybe rationalize it by saying they're running solo because they don't want anybody knowing their identity and they want to keep their involvement in graff a secret. But I know a lot of people out there are flying solo, and it's not necessarily a choice. It's because they don't know any other riders. And in today's times, there's a persistent, stinging loneliness that affects many people. And when I think about graffiti writers pursuing an inherently social activity by themselves, and they want to meet other people and they can't, it makes me sad. And a lot of the stuff that happened in my time in the 80s and in the 90s created this environment for kids today. And a lot of people who are my age and younger that have kids now grew up hearing stories about kids being taken off the street and never seen again. And the last thing that they want is that to happen to their kid, so they don't let their kids go out and explore the world like I did. But I can say, not everybody's solo. And there are tons of riders out there that are in community with other riders, but they're just in community online. And if people doing whack stuff to children in the 80s and 90s played a role in kids being more housebound today, the internet has played as big, if not a bigger role. And just like with hip-hop culture in the 2000s, graffiti is now present in many places that don't have a scene because somebody saw it on the internet and they got inspired. And because of this, in 2025, you can live in a town that only has 25 people and doesn't have a graffiti scene, and you can still consider yourself involved and in the mix. And also in 2025, you can have a favorite graff rider and never see this person physically up. And in the 90s, I can say this wasn't as likely. Towards the end of my time as a writer, I copped the book Subway Art and became a big fan of Dondi and Scene. However, despite becoming a fan of their work couldn't overtake the work of the writers that I saw up every day, and those writers remain my favorites. But if the writers around your way aren't all that dope, or simply there aren't any writers around your way, whoever's your favorite writer is somebody you're only gonna see on the internet. And what graff ultimately means to a lot of people has been changed by the internet as well. And to a lot of people out there, graff has nothing to do with the real world. It has everything to do with them tagging with their friends that they made on social media in a video game. And if I wish graffiti writers had anything in present times, it would be that feeling of togetherness that we had and the bond that we shared in real life. But then again, not everything about being together in those times was all that great. And I can say in my own personal experience, many times you're around people and kind of stuck with people that you didn't even like. But because a lot of times you kicked it with people that were from your area, maybe from your people or from your school, you were expected to endure the presence of somebody that you couldn't stand for the sake of us all being together. And no matter how much you didn't like somebody and how much people knew you didn't like somebody, if you avoided this person or avoided your people, you were looked at as doing something wrong and switching up. And for a lot of these people, you really wanted to avoid them because you knew you couldn't trust them. But when it came to trust, you couldn't really trust the people you liked either. And people would switch on each other very fast, and friends would turn on each other and become enemies seemingly over nothing. And 1 second you'd be cool with somebody, and the very next second, be enemies, and you never knew when this second was coming, and if you were me, you're always on the lookout for it. And I'm thankful that a lot of you guys aren't going to have to experience this great distrust of your own friends, but I wish it didn't come with so much loneliness. But it's very important to say that things are only this way in this moment. In 25 or 30 years from now, we might be looking at a different situation entirely. And depending on what's going on with graff 25 or 30 years from now, especially socially, we might look back on this current moment and either see it as a terrible time or as a great one.